Dominic's her husband.
Dimitri.
Dimitri.
Well, she has two in college. I don't know. He's fixing something.
So we need a 2/3.
I thought I was in the way. I'm enjoying it. It's been a funny day, filled with lots of action. Sometimes I wonder how much more can happen.
Todd, do you want to say? You're tempting fate.
Yeah, we're allowed to do that.
Manager, you ready?
Ready? Yes.
Run. Good evening, everyone. We are going to call this study session to order. Confirmation. It's on?
Red, there you are. Now you are.
I had it on. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Starting the calling the study session to order. Confirmation of a quorum, City Clerk.
Mayor Gilmore confirming a quorum.
Thank you. So our study session this evening is on the Tasman East Pacific Plan Area Update. We have our Community Development Director. Welcome.
Thank you. As mentioned, my name is Andrew Crabtree. I'm the Director of Community Development, and here to lead us through a presentation to begin our study session on the Tasman East Specific Plan process to date. The Tasman East area, which as you can see here is bounded by Lafayette Street, Tasman Drive, the Guadalupe River, and then the southern boundary of the city's golf course there, the City Place project site going forward. It's a 45-acre area. It's identified in the city's general plan as a focus area intended to support future residential development close to jobs and to create a pedestrian-friendly, urban, walkable environment with a lot of different amenities for future residents, retail, open space, and so forth. Tonight's objectives for the meeting is to provide you with an update, status report of where we are on the specific plan process, and really to focus on the open space strategy that we have developed at this point and want to take forward through the remainder of the process and have any input that the council wants to give us on that open space strategy. We'll also touch on school site and next steps for the planning process. So our last check-in with the City Council was on June 6th at a study session. We had a lot of discussion around placemaking and the desire to emphasize that as part of the planning process for Tasman East. We talked about the street network and what a multimodal street network would look like. And since then, we've been working with our consultants to move forward the traffic analysis for the specific plan area that would have some different roadway alternatives in the analysis. So as part of the environmental impact report process, we can compare what traffic conditions would look like with different roadway sections and sort of explore that balance between the desire to create a really pedestrian-friendly street environment, but also to meet the needs of moving automobiles in the area. Excuse me. And we've also been working with the consultant to prepare the draft open space strategy that we have before you. We've also conducted several meetings with stakeholders to sort of discuss this as we bring it forward. So on the open space strategy, This has been presented to you at a high level in terms of objectives in the past, so sort of reiterating or recapping some of that discussion. But there was a decision to go forward with what we call sort of a distributed land open space plan. And there's certainly a desire to create larger open space areas that can support a lot of different types of uses. But at the same time, there's understanding that we need to have open spaces distributed throughout the plan area so that future residents will be in close proximity to a variety of different open space areas, that this project will get implemented over many years. Different parcels will come forward at different times. And so we want a strategy that allows for that or accommodates that phased implementation and gives us an opportunity to bring on open space as individual development projects come forward. Also in terms of feasibility, as we spread some of the open space out over different properties, it makes it easier for us to actually implement the strategy going forward. Just also a reminder that the specific plan area is about 45 acres gross. Once we take out the road areas, that leaves us with about 38 acres. The objectives that we've discussed is to develop 4,500 dwelling units across that 38 net acre area. Once we take out some of that for open space, the developable area will get even smaller. And so we're really looking at densities of over 100 units per acre on the development parcels in order to get close to that 4,500 dwelling units. Just have some examples of what the vision is for the types of open spaces that we are looking to develop in the specific plan area, what the strategy should support. This is an example from Emeryville. It shows a paseo that sort of creates a linkage between different parts of that neighborhood. A highly landscaped area that encourages people to move around through the open space areas between different buildings. This is another example that shows a more sort of, I can call like sort of an urban plaza type space. Again, there's uses or design of that space to promote activity sort of along our placemaking goals, that people will come and use that space and interact in different ways. This example illustrates even sort of more urban open space. This may be more of like a privately owned but publicly accessible type open space where you've got commercial activities. Again, it's a place where people can go and engage in different types of recreational activities and be in community. And so, sort of along the lines of placemaking. And then this fourth example sort of shows a possible joint use area where you have some sort of a school or a daycare or some sort of facility like that that could be located adjacent to open space area. And so trying to think about how to combine different open space areas in proximity to each other so that they support each other. As we work through the planning process, we found it useful to think about the plan area in terms of districts, and then really to have an open space goal for each district within these areas. So these sort of reflect the kind of the different character, the names, the river district being close to the Guadalupe River. The Hill District reflects the fact that there's a fair amount of increase in elevation as you move north from the project site. Station District, Bridge Districts are closer to where this train station is, the more urban side of the project site. I also want to touch on the fact that, or acknowledge that the properties are not all in the same place in terms of where the owners are in thinking about development. And so the properties that you see shaded here are ones for which there is active participation by the property owners in the specific planning process, meaning that they've all expressed some interest in the outcome of the plan, whether in several cases they've already partnered with a developer or the developers purchased the site and they're looking to develop according to the plan, or at least they have a representative, the properties are on the market and they're participating that way. And so again, something taken into consideration as we think about how to implement the plan going forward. And then the converse, this diagram shows the properties that we don't currently have someone actively engaged with us in terms of seeing the plan through. And we've certainly had interaction with these property owners, but none of them have said, that they are intending in the near future to see their properties redeveloped. They have an existing investment in their property that they want to keep for the near term. So, as we've gone through this planning process, we've had conversations about how to phase the plan, how to allow these existing uses to remain as long as they want, and make sure that they're protected at the same time that the rest of the plan area moves forward according to the vision. So to get to the open space strategy, I'm going to walk through a series of sort of components of it. The first component, dedicated open space. These are areas that would be, through the city's parkland dedication ordinance, obtained as sort of your most traditional park type areas. They would be dedicated to the city, publicly owned, publicly accessible spaces. Within each district, we have an acreage number that we want to achieve for that district. In aggregate, those would result in 5 acres of dedicated open space. So adding on to that is a second type of open space, which is also, again, publicly dedicated, but it would be more in the form of paseos that connect these open spaces together. Desire to make sure that each open space is connected with others, and then also to the Guadalupe River area as well. So in total, that would bring us up to a little over 6 acres. And then the next intent is to work with the property developers to create publicly accessible but privately owned open spaces, sort of like the urban plazas that we saw in one of the earlier examples. These would be spaces that the public would have full access to, but they wouldn't necessarily be in the city's park system. And developers would get credit for it as open space through the development process, again, consistent with the city's ordinances. And that would bring the acreage total up to a little over 7 acres of publicly accessible, usable open space. And then next we want to acknowledge that there is private open space within these developments as well. The city's parkland dedication ordinance gives credit for private open spaces of sort of a 50% discount, you'd say, so that if they provide 1 acre of private open space, they get credit for half an acre. So using that metric, we've accounted for about half of what we expect to see in terms of private open space, or a total of 3.9 acres, which brings us to a total of 10 acres of open space in the strategy that is being identified here. And you can see those spaces are really distributed throughout the plan area. The private open space is represented by the blue circles, the public open spaces by the green. Also want to acknowledge that there's other types of open space. The site surrounded by some of this is generally not going to be usable open space areas because of slope, but they're there and they provide for a visual relief. They can be landscaped and so forth, and so to add on to the sense of open space within. Also want to acknowledge that the area is in a context where future residents will have access to other open space amenities, whether that be the new Central Park North attached to the City Place development, or the Eula Stack area, or the Guadalupe River Trail, that there are other, or the soccer park and so forth, that there are other open space areas in the vicinity. Then briefly, in our last study session, we had a conversation about a potential school site. What we're really proposing at this point is we call it sort of a floating designation. We're not identifying a particular property for a school, but sort of indicating that the plan supports a school. And really, if there were to be one developed, that putting it sort of in the central area would be preferable, adjacent to open space areas and the paseo and so forth, so it can take advantage of that and support the community. For next steps, The next step is to distribute the environmental impact report. We're looking at a late April distribution date. That's a 45-day circulation. We would have somewhere along that time frame a community meeting where we can get comments on the contents of the environmental impact report. And then the next step after that would be to come back to the City Council with another study session, really going over the contents of the draft plan. We can discuss comments received on the environmental impact report. And then overall, the schedule intention is to complete the planning process and come to the Planning Commission, City Council for consideration late summer, early fall. So for our meeting tonight, our objectives again, just to summarize, were to provide you with a progress report and take any input on that if there is any. And then on the open space strategy in particular, we're looking for council input, concurrence with the approach we're taking, or other things that you want to make sure that we address. And then as well, the school site designation and any other thoughts on next steps. So available to answer any questions at this time.
I have a question. Can you remind me of the acreage of this specific plan area?
Yeah, certainly. So the total acreage is 45 acres. And then as mentioned, once we take out roadway, we have about 38 acres left.
Okay, so you're looking for a input on the open space and a potential school site. Have you spoken to the school district about potential school site? I know there's several specific plans in the area, and is this the area they're looking at, or are you just looking to reserve some space for this specific plan?
Right. So they've been a participant with us throughout the planning process, and they have expressed an interest in a potential school site in this area. At the last study session, the council talked about the possibility of a very urban type school, which can be like 1 or 2 acre school site. And I'd say that's where we are in terms of the discussions with the school district so far.
Okay, and then I had one more question then, Councilmember Caserta. Is there any thought or reservation for community buildings or library space or any type of infrastructure for public infrastructure?
Yeah. The idea of a community room also was raised at our last study session, and that will be something that we'll continue to, in the body of the plan document, we can call for, there can be policies that support that or talk about how that might happen. I don't know at this point that we're looking for a library space, but we can follow up on that more.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Caserta?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I see this as pivotal to the vision of smart growth and making the related project even more successful. My question is, what percentage of the owners there are on board right now, and what happens with supporting the Fifth Amendment property rights of the Constitution if there are holdouts?
Yeah. So in the illustration that you see up there, the areas shaded in the darker gray underneath are the areas where the property owners have not really expressed support for the plan. They may be indifferent or have concerns, whereas the areas in the lighter color, which are just a little bit over half, are areas where we have property owners or their representatives who have expressed an interest in seeing the plan go forward. The commitment is that in the plan, in the zoning, and so forth that are adopted, the existing uses would be allowed to continue fully as legal uses, right? That there would be no grant amortization or process to push them out, and so that they would be able to continue their activities and be protected in that way.
My next question is with the housing crisis, and I know it's more open space, but this feeds in that, in my opinion. Are we looking at really diverse type of housing stock here? I mean, even micro units, et cetera?
The answer is yes, that as the property owners and developers have come forward, some have expressed, there's a mix of property owners here, and they have different development types, and including micro units. Now, I would say they're all higher density types, right? We've sort of talked about the floor being 100 units to the acre. So,
yeah.
So they're going to be in that range, but there are some micro units that are being proposed.
And I like that you said density here, because I think that is key here. Can you just kind of clarify why your vision for this open space is going to really encompass many different age users in a different way of how we see open space?
Certainly. So as we get into a more urban type of development pattern, it sort of forces us to think about open space in a more programmed way, in a more densely utilized way, rather than just big fields of green, in order to be feasible to achieve the kind of residential development that we're looking for. And so we haven't gotten to the point yet, certainly in the process of programming individual open spaces, but we are, through the strategy, making sure there's a variety of types of open spaces. There's some that are larger. There would be a 2.5 acre area, and then there would be all the way down to these really small, private but publicly accessible open spaces, which could be more of the sort of urban cafe plaza type setting.
This is very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember O'Neill?
Thank you. So with this whole center block, this appropriately called the center district, the heart of it, that where we have property owners that are not interested in participating at all. So kind of in understanding, needing to make sure that one property owner doesn't get hit with absorbing all of the open space. So we're looking at having kind of like this dispersed approach to the open space, particularly with the absence of willingness at this point to participate from those property owners. So we're looking at that. What's your view? Is that like help or hinder the effectiveness of the open space if it has to kind of be scattered around rather than concentrated?
Well, I think there's pluses and minuses, but we're looking at what's realistic and doable, and ultimately, I think within the context of a just scattered or distributed amount of open spaces, we can certainly get to a very positive outcome if we were careful and we're thoughtful about it as we go forward. So, one benefit is that we are working with an individual developer within one of these districts. We can certainly go to them and say, here's the obligation of that district. How can we work with you to get that done? Right. So that's one thing that's a positive, instead of you can kind of take on the problem here or there as a developer is ready to move forward. And then, another benefit is that, by having it distributed, future residents will never be too far from an open space area, right? So they'll have that amenity close by, and by connecting them together, then they have access to the entirety of it.
So I guess it's not really viewed as feasible to somehow get the property owners that are actively engaged, or the developers, to somehow come up with some kind of agreement, like, okay, we do want to have a larger shared open space, and somehow we're going to come up with some kind of cost sharing to enable that to happen. Because as we said, it's not feasible or fair to expect that one person, all of their property is going to become park.
Right.
Is there any precedent, whatever, for having them somehow come up with some kind of cost sharing in order that there would be a more aggregated open space area, if that was viewed as being a better approach?
Well, I think that was explored and discussed through this process, and we've gained a few property owners as we've gone through that are more active, but we started with a number that were. I think that as you see here, the largest, that sort of 2.5 acre open space is kind of placed where it is, partly because that's close to the river and there's an advantage there, but it's also reflective of some of the larger properties are there, so it's easier to work with a larger property to get a larger open space. I think that when you talk about that, you could sort of hand it all over to the developers and say, okay, you come up with a way to solve that problem. But in this case, the city has been more running the process and being in the lead. We have to work through our own ordinances, and that requires that that each developer has an obligation that they can write us a check or deal with on their own property. But this is kind of trying to work with those tools and get us to a point where we think it's a good outcome. We think that there are sort of those more large regional, like sports fields and things in the vicinity that you might get to with a larger amount of open space. But here it's more about creating amenities within the future neighborhood for the residents. And so given that it's a relatively small amount of total land area, having these more 2.5 acres or an acre is still a reasonable amount of open space, but having these little more intimate type open spaces is appropriate.
Okay. So one of the one district's labeled the station district, and then there's some references on the slides about talking about the transportation plan. But so I know that we have talked about, and we have money set aside, $500,000 for planning from for the related company for City Place for a true multimodal station there at the Lafayette and Great America. So when you're talking about and making reference to commenting on transportation strategy, are we really looking at that? When we talk about a station district, are we really looking at how do we leverage having a multimodal station in the future there at Lafayette and Tasman, that where ACE, Capital Corridor, Amtrak, light rail, buses, corporate shuttles are all working, and is that playing into the thinking of the developers, and also what the potential contributions maybe would be to help make a station like that happen, which would help this area be successful?
Okay. So I sort of heard a few things there. On the land use plan, I'd say first that the land use plan is intended to be oriented towards the station, right? With the Calle de Sol sort of becoming the sort of the heart of the new community, and providing a very pedestrian-friendly, bicycle-friendly connection to the station, and sort of also to the center. The vision is that it's a street with commercial uses, that it's really kind of the place in the middle of the community. So it draws people in and then connects them to the station. As we work through the plan itself, it can have policies in it around transportation demand management measures that will be required of the different projects, and that's certainly being explored and worked on. And there's an expectation there that future development will have those kinds of measures. And then I think at this point we're still the specifics of that are still to be determined in terms of is an individual project going to contribute towards what improvements is it going to contribute towards. But we'll take that back as input and make sure that we are ready to address it in our next session.
So my last comments kind of focus on what we're really looking, the kinds of densities that we've talked about, and the desired number of units that we had been talking about, potentially thousands of units coming out of this. And looking at the pictures, they're kind of like mid-height. I mean, so in terms of actual size of some of these buildings, and I'm curious as to what is the current thinking. And we saw some very ambitious ideas, previously a couple weeks ago or last week, I forget which, from Kylie for the other large development that's in its infancy stages. I want to emphasize to the public, very infancy stages. But obviously part of that property, they had very tall heights, and I know that as you go further west on the property, what we call the Yahoo property, it's not constrained by FAA. So that's kind of like, so what are the developers thinking, or what are they proposing at this point, and what is what could be the maximum in order to achieve those densities that we originally talked about, taking into consideration the FAA restrictions?
So I would at this point just mention too that we don't have any applications on file as of yet from any of these developers. They're sort of waiting. My understanding is to see where the plan progresses, and making sure that what they do come in with is consistent with that plan. But from our conversations with them, if you look at the micro unit project, for example, the density would be higher. But in terms of building form, most of them are looking at sort of the 6 to 8 story wood frame over concrete type construction that you see more commonly. I think the Kylie project's a really unique proposal at this point. This would be more in keeping with what sort of the market has been delivering in terms of multifamily development. And some of them have discussed having multiple phases, whereas in the first phase, that's what they would propose. In a later phase, they might look at going to the tower reinforced concrete type construction that could produce taller buildings. There is some height constraint here, but it's still a couple hundred feet. You could build some fairly tall buildings and still be within the a little bit less than 200, but still be within the airport height limits. So that said, we've talked about really a minimum of 100 units to the acre in the plan. If you think about 38 acres and you subtract 10 acres for open space, you would have to be up at densities around 160 units to the acre to really get to the 4,500 target. Some will, we anticipate projects will come in at less than that, closer to 100 to begin with, but over time it's possible that they can, as the market continues to build, that we might see that higher densities and then get to the number that's envisioned.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Watanabe?
Thank you, Mayor. That's the problem with asking later. You've asked a lot of my questions, Councilmember O'Neill, but I do have a couple left. Thank you for the question about the transportation. That's definitely a very important question, and I'm glad you brought up the multimodal study that's planned for out in the area. I understand there's supposed to be retail that's supposed to be a part of this project as well, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, yes, the plan and vision is that in particular Calle del Sol would be sort of where the retail would be focused, so that neighborhood serving retail. It's not a regional commercial attraction. It's really meant to be place-making retail that meets the needs of the residents in a very immediate sort of sense in that neighborhood.
So there won't be a Safeway, basically.
Well, I can't say yes or no at this point, obviously, but you might get a small grocery store traditionally in that kind of mixed-use environment. It's not impossible, but those larger grocery retailers are looking for a certain population. I'm not sure that we would get it here in the radius with another Safeway and so forth, right?
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I had the same concern about, starting off with 45 acres and then going down to 38 acres, and then how do you still get 4,500 units per, on the whole project, because you've lost that space. So, when talking about going higher, beyond 6 to 8 stories, my understanding is the higher you go, the more expensive it is when you have to start going to steel and...
So what happens is that there's a sort of a step in cost, right? So you can build wood frame at a certain cost per square foot, and then as you go to steel and concrete, that goes up. You can recoup some of that cost by going taller. So very rare to see a 9 or a 10-story building that requires that type of construction. Once a developer goes to the steel concrete construction, they want to be closer to 20 stories to then start recouping some of the additional construction costs.
Okay. And then just lastly, the school, the floating school, where's the slide? The floating designation for the school site. Is it planned to be contained in that area, the central district, or because I'm just wondering how it would impact some of the other property owners, and would this be a public-private development?
So at this point, it's a designation that suggests where it might be a good place to locate a school, but it's not intended to reflect a particular property in mind. So we haven't really committed in any way. We would continue to talk with the school district about what their interests are and see if it relates to that. But in terms of thinking about how it might relate to this community, if Calle de Sol becomes sort of the center of the new neighborhood, perhaps having access from Calle de Sol makes sense, and then also connecting to one of the open space areas on that, the larger one planned in that area being on the west side of Calle de Sol. And so that was the sense of like, if we were to think about where might it make the most sense to put a school, that this was kind of the general vicinity that we arrived at. That said, certainly, ultimately we don't, we're not in a position of controlling property and so forth. It would be up to the school district to really take the lead on how they want to implement a school if they decide that they want to in this area.
And has any question come up as to potentially how big the school could be?
Well, we, over the year plus that we've been working through this process, there's been discussions about that, certainly. We've heard input in the past about the school, that they would like a larger site if they were going to do a school. And then at the last study session, we talked about that sort of 1 to 2 acre, more urban model came from, the council had that discussion and input. So I think it's a question still that we're going to be exploring further with the school district. But
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis.
Andrew, my questions were basically about the Water District and Sierra Club and the connectability to what's happening there, because that was the big plan, was if we were going to have less parking, driving, or whatever, because I know people use our creek trail to get back and forth because it's a heck of a lot easier to get there. So were they stakeholders in these conversations? Because I don't know about when you were doing the specific plan, who all was engaged in this, because I see Gita sitting here. So I'm wondering what role did the Water District and the Sierra Club have in this?
yeah, so that they're aware of the planning effort, and we received a letter from the Water District, I believe that you may have that access to, where they talk about the access from to the Guadalupe River Trail, and the process they have for negotiating any type of access that we might end up trying to implement through the project development. And we understand their concerns too about anything on their property, maintenance costs, how that gets addressed. And so I think again we're fairly early on just trying to land on an open space strategy that we want to try to implement, and then we'll certainly work with them if this is the direction that we're following to go forward with on how we can where we can connect, how we can connect to that trail, because we do see definite benefit in providing these future residents with ready access to the trail. And there can be some flexibility as to where that occurs. We haven't committed to a particular location at this point. So if that
Kind of answers, okay.
Yeah.
And then also, is this all rental, not for sale housing? This is going to be, because you don't know the numbers yet. You don't know how high they're going. You don't know what's really going on. There's no application. So that's why I was curious as to, is this all rentals or?
Yeah. So we would not in the plan dictate one or the other.
Okay.
Right. So it's up to the developers what they want to propose.
It's their, okay, great, all right. And then as far as phasing goes, because you have a nice hunk of people here that are not willing to accept this. So how are we going to build around them and not disturb their businesses?
Right. So the way the plan land use is set out,
okay,
that's certainly doable, right? That there's the streets are already there. The Calle de Mundo and Calle de Luna are existing streets, and we can work with that right of way so that from a physical, there's enough of a buffer to actually go build the plan. And then it becomes a question of what types of uses and disclosures and noise mitigations and things like that may be a necessary part of the future residential development. And it's as we go through the environmental process, the permitting process, there's an obligation there to deal for the new development to address the interface with the existing and making sure that we have appropriate protections in place. So, and we'll certainly look at what activities are there and making sure that they're respected and addressed in new development.
Okay, and the only reason I asked you is because we had a gentleman here who was complaining about what was happening to his existing property, why development was going on around him, and I guess didn't understand that impact that was going to happen. So hopefully that there's a lot of communication going on with who's there, who's not there, who wants to be there. So my next question is, as far as open space goes, are we going to have, because we don't know what this looks like I want to say like Tavern on the Green, you know, something that's height in the air, would that be considered open space? So if somebody has a building that's 6 feet, oh my gosh, 6 stories tall, I mean, is the possibility of having open space on the top? Or, I don't know, the CEQA, is that part of the CEQA process? Are we going to be looking into that? If they're going to look at open spaces at different levels of this? Because it's pretty dense as far as I'm looking at this.
So that would fall into the private open space, sort of that dark blue tier, in terms
Okay.
of type of space, most likely. I mean, again, with the Kylie project, they talked to having podium open space that would be very publicly facing. That's, again, very unusual. And we're really not anticipating that here, that, you know, whatever open spaces there would be on the podium would be, you know, your typical, you know, swimming pools and that type of amenity for the residents of a particular development. So they'll receive some credit for that. You know, so we do expect to see those type of uses through the course of our development.
Oh, and one more question. Affordable housing. The vice mayor wants affordable housing. She said, here. So anyway, any discussion about that?
We've had some preliminary conversations with the
Okay.
property owners about it, and, you know, this is you know, the city's ordinance is, you know, really taking effect starting August 1st, so it's potentially a pipeline project, but you know, we're looking to them to make some sort of proposal that we would bring to the council.
Okay, and I think I know why she's asking that question, because when City Place goes in, there's gonna be a lot of workers in there, and they're gonna need some place to go, and I hope not at a great distance, but they'll be able to be like kind of right next door. So this kind of fits a nice little pattern. So I'm sure that's why she asked the question.
That
But
would be
anyway,
very-
or I did through her. My lips were moving, but it was her hand. So anyway, okay, thank you, Andrew.
Okay, so I had a question because I see we received a letter from a group of developers who comprise represent about 60% of the property there now, so that are interested in supporting the specific plan. So how do we look at this plan and still maintain some flexibility in terms of the development of this area, yet make sure that we have, you know, whether or not we have a school site there, at least reserve the floating site wherever it may end up, and the park space, and we do our placemaking and everything we need to do to make this a real vibrant area, but yet still remain flexible in how we're looking. And I'm interested how we're going to equitably, and to really follow up on Councilmember O'Neill's questions, how do we equitably look at the placement of maybe potentially a school site or a library or, you know, community room or something like that on the site without penalizing a particular property owner to carry the burden of that, because that's not fair. So how do we look at equitably, you know, making this fair for those that are going to develop, you know, in the near term, but knowing that there's going to be development in the long term as well. How do we reserve that so that not any one or small group of property owners carry the burden of the public infrastructure that needs to take place on this property?
So that's not a simple answer to that question.
I wanted a simple
I know,
answer.
unfortunately. I would like one too.
It was a loaded question.
But it is something, you know, that we deal with both on a routine basis, and in this case, it's kind of a special basis too, right? Because, you know, individual developments normally, in a routine way, have an obligation for parklands or for offsite improvements and so forth that there's a, you know, a system in place to address. But then also here where we're dealing with creating a whole new neighborhood, that kind of raises the level of the conversation to what other amenities do we need to think about? And if like if ultimately it's our conclusion that we need a library, or certainly expect a community room, it sounds like, how do we then sort of throw in those extra unusual things a little bit into the mix? I think it's an opportunity here, in that we have so many property owners engaged, that we can kind of look to them to help us solve that question, and how to get to equitable a solution for that. And then I would just say in terms of like some of what you see in open space here, there was a lot of thought put into trying to make that equitable across the different properties as we're going forward. And I think we had some support from our property owners in what we're bringing forward. I'm sorry, from the developer group that you saw in your letter, supporting this plan. So I think we're getting there on that. And we'll continue to talk with them about some of these other uses, and looking at, sort of a proportional share, how, whether that's a per unit or we have to, it gets a little or per square foot, as there's different marketing values and so forth, how we deal with that. But it is something we will look at in the specific plan.
I think the beauty of this specific plan is that the amenities are going to be there on the related project, City Place. At least the retail and other shopping and restaurant amenities are there for this future neighborhood. And then the trail system with Eulastack and the future park on City Place. So a lot of the boxes are going to be checked for this neighborhood, but in respect to the people that are going to be living there in the future, they have to have things on site and available, because that's going to be a lot of people living in a small area. So we want to make sure that they're going to really enjoy a really wonderful quality of life there, and that there's enough public improvements there without overdoing it and without overburdening particular property owners, but looking at it as a whole. So that would be my concern on this. Anybody else on the council? Okay, seeing none. City Clerk, do we have any cards on this? Okay, is there any member of the public that would like to speak? Please come forward. Welcome. Familiar face. Here we go.
Thank you. I'm Richard Reisman. First met many of you when I was on the development side, working on the projects on Lick Mill Boulevard 28 years ago. So it's nice to see you again. Today I'm with Marcus and Millichap, now doing land brokerage for development. I'm here with my partner, Tom Dolio, and we have worked in this park. I just wanted to bring up the issue that probably many of you are aware of, and that is that the island, that area where people aren't into it yet, is afflicted with easements that were specifically drawn for the industrial park that was designed to be in the early 1970s. And that type of land utilization, that type of FAR, is so radically different from the type of density that we're talking now, that the higher land value associated with what you're envisioning here, which is wonderful, is not available if those easements are not discarded in favor of the future use. And there's a lot more discussion about it. I'm going to come in at way less than my 2-minute time. I will submit some information on this perhaps separately through the city clerk. But it is why the coloring on those drawings between the assembled larger parcels around the outside are so different from the island parcels in the middle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'd be very interested in getting that information. Thank you. Anyone else? Please come forward and just line up. Good evening.
Good evening, Jan Hintermeister. I'm on the library, Board of Library Trustees, although I'm speaking only on behalf. I just wanted to follow up on a comment that the mayor made regarding libraries. I mean, it's not often a service that we think of with respect to new developments, but given our need for housing, a lot of housing in the city, and the number of people that are going to be moving in, we do need to consider our impact on services. And I'm not sure exactly how to calculate that or figure that out, but we need to make sure that even with the existing Northside Library, that we can maintain the level of service for new residents. And so that has to be part of our calculation, and it may be that simply having a community room isn't sufficient to meet that need. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at in much more detail. On another topic entirely, I think we should follow up with the bird safe design principles that were included in the related project, and at least have that start as a minimum requirement for major new developments in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, Ron Patrick, a property owner. Thank you for continuing to consider that there are people who own property there who want to stay. We're not holdouts, we just don't want to move to Gilroy. Okay, industrial land is extremely expensive, about 20 million an acre, and we aren't even being offered anything close to that. As far as the roads are concerned, in the center section, the island holdout, there's CC&Rs for Lafayette Business Park. The fact is, they have not bought 75% of the land. If you want to change the roads and access, instead of calling us up late at night and saying that our neighbor wants to do it, and why don't we do it, and playing games like that, because we all talk to ourselves, to each other and ourselves, why don't you just buy the
Same here,
property?
yeah.
Why don't you just buy the property and do whatever you want with it, instead of sort of these late night phone calls? But thanks, we're looking forward to the development. You have 150 acres there, and you're putting in a bunch of restaurants that aren't paying people a lot of money. And so, you know, it's not my problem that people are going to get jobs there. They're not going to be paid a lot of money. And so you have 150 acres that you're renting to Related. We have 45 acres that we're being pressured to sell to solve a problem. We've been there for a long time. It's not a great part of town. It's kind of like the Wild West. And finally, some attention is being paid to it. We'd like to enjoy some of the benefits of being there over all these years. We look forward to this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Gilmore and council members. First of all, I'm Geeta Dev. I'm here speaking on behalf of the Sierra Club, Loma Prieta chapter. I want to thank the members, the council members, for a lot of the comments. I thought many of them asked some important and hard questions. This 45 acres is part of a much larger 400-acre related project. It's the housing for that project, as Councilmember Caserta pointed out. And its defining features will be that it's riverfront property, it's high density, and it will have this multimodal station. These are sort of that's what this neighborhood is about. So I would ask everyone once again to remember what Councilmember Davis said, which is that cities all around the United States are rediscovering their rivers. They've been using them as dumping grounds, trash collections. They're finding that these are revenue-generating places that the public can love. And it's outdoor space and it's recreation space. Therefore, the connection to the river right here is vital. And I applaud Councilmember O'Neill and Mayor Gilmore for saying we need to come up with a strategy where everyone pays into a pool to develop these open spaces. There are property owners in the middle who are not sure yet what they're going to do. The rest of it has to be figured out so that the 2.5 acres theoretically that's on the river needs to be a riverfront property. If we can go higher and denser and make incentives to do that, that would be worth doing, because we need all the housing we can get over here. And finally, this is something that's not part of this thing, but we did earlier say that the roads need to be narrow, 2-lane roads, not 4-lane roads. And I think Mayor Gilmore had emphasized that, and I hope that has gotten into the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, please come forward. Everyone's coming from the back of the room. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Helen Narciso. I'm a resident of the North Side, Santa Clara. I fully support the development. However, we have to be mindful of the infrastructure. And also, I'm looking at the development as an opportunity to bring more amenities in the area. I'm a baby boomer, and I would like to have access to all this public, transportation, or maybe a gymnasium or multicultural center and parks by just walking. Because maybe 20 years from now, I will not be able to have a driver's license. So that's what I'm looking for. Because I plan to age in place at the north side Santa Clara.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, council members. I'm Shell Healy from Santa Clara Unified School District, and I wanted to thank Mr. Crabtree for adding in the school site, even if it's not designated, but adding it into the EIR. And we are looking for another school site up in this area, as well as most of the specific plans. We do know that in the future, this area is growing and there are going to be more families, and we are going to need to educate those students and at least prepare them. We're noticing that a lot more, the birth rates are going up in North San Jose especially, and that's what our last demographics report that came out in January stated. So we know that we're going to need more facilities in the coming years up here, and especially for the preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. So we look forward to working with future developers and hope that we can find a space in this specific plan for a school. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening.
Good evening. I didn't know I'd make it back in time for comment for Tasman East. That's wonderful.
Good.
So Kirk Vartan, I would like to, and I'm not sure what other people have said tonight, but advocate for looking at a good mixed use, mostly housing design on Tasman East, not being afraid of the densities that will necessarily pick up from the City Place project, which it couldn't accommodate. So this is such a great opportunity. I hope it's a win that you look at it at a very pedestrian-focused level with not a lot of car thoroughfares through the project area, and that it's really pedestrian-focused and has direct pedestrian connections to City Place. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Heather Narciso. I also live I come here as a North Side resident, lived there for 33 years, but I've also lived in cities such as New York City, Salt Lake City, Berkeley. So, I look forward to the opportunity to be able to have these developments where, I can walk to these amenities and places. So I do agree with my mom for once, Helen, where, I think we do need a community space, community building, because, I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I think of what makes me have to drive. And it's, there's no community center there. Yes, there's Lick Mill, but they have like one music class once a week in the evening that I can't even make it to. So I think it's important to have these community buildings, library, whatever, a community center where, the residents just south of that area can also use, because yes, we're talking about all these future residents, but just a reminder that there's other residents there, current residents, who could also use these amenities. And again, just focusing on the transportation as well, because that's, it's very overwhelming to be a resident and hear all these things about that 50-story new development on the Yahoo building, City Place. It's really scary because, I recently made a decision for work where I'm really just 6 miles away, but now I had to make a decision because of traffic. I'm at the opposite corner of Santa Clara. I work at Homestead at Kaiser Santa Clara, and now I had to move because of traffic, so that I'm saving 3 miles. So transportation is a big part of this. So thank you to the council for always bringing that up with these new developments. Bye.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi. I was thinking in terms of open space and the property owners in the center district, and industrial and commercial property owners do not tend to be married to their properties the way, say, a single-family homeowner does. And we really need more housing in this city. And going off of what previous commenters said, in order to build more housing, we need to do it right, and we're going to need to charge the developers enough and to get them to pay enough to get a good high-dense neighborhood, and that means open space, and that means we're going to need to charge them what it takes to build open space in the center district. So I really encourage city to get the developers that are on board to pony up and pay, because we do need more housing and it needs to be done right. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi there, Hazel Albato. I've been a resident of Northside for over 3 decades. I think Tasman East, the location is just, it's a great opportunity. I take the trails to go to the Alvisa Marina. I take, I bike around. I just want to bring up that someone mentioned just a community room. I don't want just a community room. I want an intergenerational center. There's Seattle, different places where they have different generations, and there's so much synergy in having different generations together. So I'd really like to see a center down in the north side. We as a community, again, in the north side, we also need another place other than Rivermark to gather as a community. City Place is going to be for regional use, entertainment use, but again, we just need another place to gather. There was also talks about using, as far as open space strategy, other existing parks. So there's Fairwood Glen Park, which is just across the street. There's more parks. So will there be improvements if you're going to use this type of strategy where it's smaller parks? Is there an opportunity there to also upgrade the existing parks so everyone can enjoy it? There's a school right across the street too, Catherine Hughes. So is this the right spot to actually have a school? Should it be at the future Kylie development? Is there an opportunity to improve the Catherine Hughes so that, again, better usage of space? And then just looking at the amenities, I'm looking at this again. I'm only a 5-minute walk from this place, and we lost our Fairwood Glen Center, a portion of it, years ago. And so I'm looking at this as an opportunity again to have a smaller grocery store, have another option other than Safeway. Just places for us to go. Again, not just thinking of future residents, but use and leverage your existing residents. We've lived there for a long time, so we know what we need. We know what we need there. We understand the challenges of being a Northside resident. So again, just understand who the Northside residents, again, what we need. Utilize us. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, city staff? I think that's the end of our public presentations. You have comments from the council. Is that enough to go on, or do you need, is that okay? So then the study session is concluded. Council, do you need a break, or do you want to go straight into the city council meeting? Everyone okay? All right. Thank you all for coming to the study session as well, and you're all welcome to stay for the council meeting.